Hello. So now that we have seen how we can create different partition table types, and in those partition table types we can create different partitions and assign different file systems to them, but still we cannot use that storage unless we mount it on some directory. Just like when we are doing installation of Linux system and we mount certain partitions on certain mount points, same is the case if we are to insert a CD-ROM or a floppy drive or a pen drive or maybe any external drive, and then to use it, and maybe for read and write operation, we first need to mount it on some directory. Now there are two ways to mounting. Either we can mount it on the fly, like just mount it for a while, do our stuff, read and write files on it, and then plug it out, or unmount it. And the other ways, and the other option that we have is like to mount it at the time of boot. So the drives which are installed in the system, we want them to be accessible once the system gets fully booted up. So let's see how we can mount the system on the fly first. So I am here on this Ubuntu terminal, and I have got a device plugged into the Linux machine, and let's first see what is the file system type on this device. So we can do that by typing in sudo and then partition editor and then the partition, which is sdb1, and over here if I type in print, we see that the partition table is MS-DOS type. So let's just get out of here. And the command to mount is mount itself, and afterwards we can define the switch like -t and what file system is in there. But most of the time this mount command is intelligent enough to judge that whatever device we are mentioning, what is its file system type. So we know that the file system type is MS-DOS, as we have seen, or the partition table type is MS-DOS. So let's just try to mount it by simply typing in device sdb1 and then the mount point. I have created a directory in here which is mnt. So once it gets mounted, and also I wanted to show you this, let me just unmount it for a while. So I type in sudo, the command is umount, and dev/sdb1. Now what I wanted to show you is just let's try to mount it without root privileges. We cannot do that. We need to have the root privileges. Now there's a problem with that. You see, at the moment I'm logged in with my own user. Now if I try to mount this device with sudo, let's see what happens. So I do that. Okay, so it has removed the mount point as well. So let's create that directory one more time, and now let's try to mount it. Now once it gets mounted, and if I do at the moment I am in home Ahmed lpic1, so if I do ls-l over here to see a long listing of the contents, we see that although I created this mnt with my credentials, once I mounted it, it has changed its credentials to root, and now only root user can write in this directory. So I can get into this directory. So if I do cdmnt, but if I try to create a file like by doing touch and then test file, I am unable to do so. Now there's a bit of a problem if we are mounting file systems using root. What we can do is that either in case our system gets booted up and we have got certain drives in there, then what we can do is that we can make an entry in etc file system table to mount certain file system types based on the users and not with the root privileges. But how about on the fly, the thing that we are doing at the moment, that we need to mount it on the fly and just use it and then remove it? Now that's a bit of a problem. Only root user can now write the files in there. Now there's a way to do that, and we can do that. Let me just get out of this directory and unmount this partition. Now we can do that by using a utility which is udisks, and afterwards we can give the flag which is mount and then the partition table name. Now what will happen is that it will mount it on an auto location which is in media. So if I press enter, you see now I have not given any root credentials, but it has successfully mounted this device at this location. So now let's see the contents of this, or rather get into this, or maybe even see the file permissions of that first. So I type in ls-l and then media, and we see that this directory that it has created, EA93, which is it has given the code, this is mentioned over here that now it is mounted with my privileges. So now I can get into this particular directory which is cd media and EA93. And now if I try to create the file by using touch or maybe manipulate anything in this directory, I should be able to do that. So let's try to create a file which is touch file, and you see that I have successfully created this file in here. Now there is also one more gotcha in here, that at the moment I am right into the terminal. I have not remotely accessed this machine, but if you remotely access a machine like even with SSH and you try to use this udisk command to mount the partition using your user credential, then by default it will not let you do so. By default, only those users which are onto the machine right there using interactive shell and not the login shell, once they use the interactive shell, they can use this command to mount any partition with their own credentials. And the other way, we have already seen that if we want to mount a partition on any of the directory, then we can use the command mount, but it has to be used with the root credentials or root privileges. So now that the file system is mounted, and since we have mounted it on the fly or just like using a command, if we boot the system or restart it, this mount will go away and will not be able to access the drive anymore. So to make it persistent so that it stays even after on the reboots, we can do that by making a changes in the file which is etc file system tab, and to do that I need to have root privileges. Then I type vi and then etc file system table, and if I bring it down here, let me just bring it down, or let's just do it one more time. So if I bring it down here, we see that it has given us these options. That first option is the file system, then the mount point, then type, then option, then dump and pass. Now file system is pretty obvious that what file system or the partition that you want to mount. Then mount point is the directory where you mount it. Type is what is the type of that file system. You can leave it blank, you can give it auto here as well, it will auto select it. Then we have got some options that we can define, like if we want to specify the user who wants to mount the file system with this group ID or user ID. Then we have these dump and pass options, which really by default these options are set to 00, which define how the file system is written, or other files are written on the file system. Now if I make it full screen, this terminal like this one, then we also see that let me just see that this is the thing that I wanted to tell you, that this comment over here, we can define that this dev SDA3 was mounted on root, and similarly this SDA4, it was mounted on swap. They were mounted during installation. What we can also define is the unique identifier, universally unique identifier, which is the disk identifier, and we can mount it. Instead of defining a partition, we can mount that particular disk identifier on a particular mount point. Now in order to find the block ID or UUID of your particular drive, you can use this command, which is block ID and you need to execute it using root privileges, otherwise it does not perform its function. So I type in sudo and then block id. Now once I do that, we see that I've got two disks installed. One is SDA and the other one is SDB, and it has got multiple partitions as well. Now we can see that SDB1 partition that we have created, its UUID is this one. So what I can do is that instead of putting in SDB1, I can also put in UUID and this number just like in this format, and then afterwards I can define the mount point. So let me just bring it over here and try to add another line by putting in, let's say, div slash SDB1. And while I'm doing that, let me also tell you that the benefit of using this UUID is that once you boot your system, sometimes what happens is that this number, this SDB or this partition number, they change. So in those cases, if you put in this partition number over here and you reboot the system and this partition is changed to something else, maybe like SDC, then definitely it will give error and will not mount the partitions correctly. But if we are using UUID, since they are unique and universal, so each and every time, even if the partition number, this number gets changed, this will remain static, and it's recommended that we should use these numbers in case of hard disk while we are trying to mount. So just letting you know that what are the different options that we can use. So if I type in div SDB1 and then after that the mount point, which is, let's say, home and then Ahmad and then lpic1 and then mnt, this is the directory where we mount it on, and afterwards let's just say that the type it should detect automatically, and options, in options I can define that it should take the defaults, like defaults, whatever defaults it takes while we use the mount command, and afterwards it should mount it with the specific user ID, like I can use my user ID, which is 1000 in this case, like you can see. Similarly, if you want to use or you do not want to mount it with specific user, then you simply put in defaults, and afterwards, so let's just try to put in this one, let's say defaults, and afterwards just 0 for dumps and another 0 for pass. So once that is done, we can save the file, or let me just remove this one, go into command mode and get out of the editor. Now once that is done and we reboot the machine, we'll see that this drive that we have put in here, a specific partition that we have mounted on a directory, it will get automatically mounted and visible once the system gets booted up. But as I said, that the recommended way to do that is to use UUID, so that even if the partition number gets changed automatically, we do not lose the visibility of the partition once the system gets booted up. So that's all there is to it as far as mounting and unmounting of different file systems are concerned, and also how you can do that in etc file system table file to make it persistent across the boards. I hope you have learned from this video, and I would like to thank you for viewing.